Hi, welcome to another episode of African Biographics. This video marks the beginning of our series on civil wars that have shaped the geopolitics of the continent. In today's episode, we cover the Sudan civil wars that led to the eventual formation of the country of South Sudan. For most of its independent history, the country of Sudan has been beset by internal conflicts that have obliterated its economy and infrastructure and weakened its systems. The First Sudan Civil War lasted from 1955 to 1972, and the Second War lasted for about 22 years, from 1983 to 2005. Today we explore the reasons that led to this much strife to occur in the nation and the effects this has had on Sudan. Sudan shelters a diverse religious and ethnic population which, during the vigorous spread of Islam in North Africa, became divided along clear geographical, ethnic and religious lines of the mostly Arab Muslim North and the Christian animist South. The first step towards politicizing the Sudan North and South ideological divisions occurred when the colonial regime administrated the North and the South as separate regions. The interactions between the Arab North and the South Sudan were restricted. As a result, the North and the South Sudan remained completely isolated from each other. While the British government fostered the Arabs' Islamic values and promoted a kind of Western-type modernization in northern Sudan, they hardly allowed the northerners to travel, trade and work in the South provinces. In the South, while the Christian missions were operating schools and hospitals, the Islamic missions, Arab culture and Arab language were discouraged. The southern Sudan was largely isolated from the northern development progress and was provided with only minimum British resources, which had them being underdeveloped. But following the British decision to grant Sudan independence in 1956, the north and south regions became integrated into a single administrative region. The line of demarcation drawn on the 1st of January 1956 provided exclusive government control to the north and semi-autonomous rule for the south. However, Sudan's founding constitution did not address two crucial issues in Sudanese culture. Firstly, it was not decided if Sudan should be a secular or Islamic state. Secondly, the country's system of national governance failed to include the majority of Sudanese and protect the rights of large minorities. Also, the Arab-led government of Sudan, based in Khartoum, failed to fulfill its promises to the Southerners to create a federal system that was more inclusive. So, as you can imagine, such a situation left the newly formed country in a fragile state. These reasons that I've stated above led to the occurrence of a state of conflict ever since. So in essence, Sudan's first civil war began when the British and Egyptian rulers decolonized the region. Fear spread across southern Sudan that centralizing political power in the north would soon have the northerners rule over them. So on August 18, 1955, the Equatorial Corps, a military unit composed of the Southerners, mutinied in the city called Torit. Rather than surrender to Sudanese government authorities, many mutineers disappeared into hiding with their weapons, marking the beginning of the first war in southern Sudan. In this first civil war in Sudan, southern insurgents, called the Anyanya, were the major fighting force against the government of Sudan, and they were fighting for greater autonomy. Secession from Sudan and the formation of an independent state was their goal. By 1969, the Anyanya controlled most of southern Sudan. The Anyanya would rebrand as the South Sudan Liberation Movement, which are referred to as the SSLM. Now better organized and with few divisions, the SSLM forces fought the Sudanese government's now bloody counterinsurgency campaign to a stalemate. The First Sudanese War would end in 1972 with the Addis Ababa peace agreement between the SSLM and the Sudanese government. It is estimated that the First Sudanese Civil War claimed 500,000 lives, and a mere 20% of these war-related deaths were armed combatants. The Sudanese government's violent counterinsurgency campaign left many southern Sudanese traumatized and with a deep mistrust of the Sudanese government. Because of this reality, the seeds for the next war were already planted as hundreds of thousands of South Sudanese returned to reclaim their land. The coming conflict would be one of the most destructive in human history. By October 1971, the government in Khartoum had established contact with the SSLM. After considerable consultation, a conference between the SSLM and the Sudanese government was convened at Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in February of 1972. Initially, the two sides were far apart. The Southerners demanded a federal state with a separate southern government and an army that would come under the federal president's command. Eventually, however, the two sides, with the help of Ethiopia's Emperor Haile Selassie, reached an agreement. The Addis Ababa Peace Agreement granted the South considerable autonomy and a share of the natural resources. A 10-year hiatus in the conflict would soon follow. However, one factor that would exacerbate the tensions between the North and the South was when the oil company, Chevron, found large oil fields in the Upper Nile and the southern Kordofan regions of Sudan. This was in 1978. Shortly thereafter, oil was discovered throughout southern Sudan. Because of this discovery, the Sudanese government in Khartoum attempted to redraw the boundaries of southern Sudan, transferring oil fields to the north. When this failed, Khartoum began taking the territory by force. Sudan's Second Civil War started as a continuation of the First Civil War. It broke out in 1983. This civil war was sparked when the military regime tried to impose Sharia law as a part of its overall policy to Islamicize all of Sudan. Beginning in 1983, the Sudan's People's Liberation Army, the SPLA, led insurrections in the south. The then president of Sudan, Khafan Imeri, had infringed on the Addis Ababa Peace Agreement by revoking the autonomy of the Southerners when he declared his intention to transform Sudan into a Muslim Arab state by imposing Sharia law across the country, including the south, an action which started conflict anew. Furthermore, President Nimeri very condescendingly not only saw himself as a guardian of his backward brethren in the south, but he felt obliged to replace the Southerners' religion with a better one, which was Islam. He also came to see the South's rich resources as a bonanza to develop the North and to view the Southerners merely as a source of cheap labor for the North. So as a result of this, war progressed between the Sudanese government and the Southerners. In 1989, a compromise between the ruling government and southern opposition groups seemed imminent, but Omar al-Bashir, a politically and religiously extreme military leader, led a successful coup against President Nimeri. Colonel Omar al-Bashir and the National Islamic Front seized power, and Bashir took the titles of President, Chief of State, Prime Minister, and the Chief of the Armed Forces. Wielding a Quran and an AK-47 rifle in Khartoum, Bashir declared to soldiers that he was going to re-engineer the country into one dominated by an ethnic Arab elite and ruled by oppressive Islamic law. Between 1989 and 1991, the Bashir military regime consolidated control over the government by banning trade unions, political parties, and other non-religious institutions. And in 1991, the Bashir regime instituted Sharia law across Sudan, including the south. Full-blown war came in the summer of 1992. A massive Sudanese government offensive into the southern Sudan drove the SPLA out of their rural strongholds and into the borderlands. Unarmed communities were bombed with conventional and chemical weapons. Tens of thousands of Arab Islamist militias, which the Bashir regime had quietly built up, were unleashed on the civilian population to pillage and occupy the south. The rapid invasion of southern Sudan nearly crushed the SPLA and divided the rebel army into two factions that would only split further. For the next few years, the SPLA factions fought each other as well as a manipulative Bashir regime who attempted to pit the SPLA groups against each other with promises of power and wealth. The southern Sudanese began fleeing into the few remaining areas underneath the SPLA control. Endless streams of refugees arrived at the Ugandan and Ethiopian borders, bringing with them horrifying stories of widespread mass killing and rape. So fearful that the war would soon spew across their own borders, Uganda and Ethiopia began providing the SPLA with direct military assistance and training. Soon enough, the SPLA started scoring major victories against the government troops and their proxy militias. While the government remained in control of several key cities and towns across southern Sudan, the SPLA forces were seizing large areas outside of the more populated cities and continued to attack transport lines and government forces that moved between the cities and the bases. Seeing the SPLA as a force that could no longer be ignored and a government that had no desire for peace, the United Nations and the United States received permission from both the regime as well as the rebels to initiate Operation Lifeline Sudan, which witnessed tens of thousands of tons of food and emergency relief supplies delivered directly to the areas affected by the war. In 2002, the United States government Sudan Peace Act declared that the Bashir regime was conducting a campaign of genocide. This Second Sudan Civil War has been described as one of the longest lasting and deadliest wars of the later 20th century, where approximately 12 million civilians were killed and more than 4 million Southerners were forced to flee their homes. The international community, led by the United States, would soon step in and pressure both sides into a series of long peace talks. In 2003 and 2004, substantial progress was made and the fighting began to die down. Meanwhile, in the western Darfur region of Sudan, an uprising against regime oppression had led to the beginning of another brutal genocide. The talks finally brokered into peace on January 9, 2005 under the terms of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which stated the following implementations were to be made. There was to be southern autonomy for 6 years, at the end of which would be a referendum to decide if the southern provinces would soon secede from the rest of Sudan. Revenues from the oil fields were to be split equally between the north and the south. Islamic law was to remain in the north and voted on for in the south. If the cessation vote was to become negative, the south and north would combine their troops into a 39,000 strong force. This Comprehensive Peace Agreement, the CPA, would also call for extensive changes to government security forces and more democratic principles leading up to national elections as well as the referendum. As per the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, a referendum was scheduled to be held in 2011 to determine if South Sudan would remain a part of Sudan or secede and gain its independence. The people of Southern Sudan would await their historic opportunity for peace and stability after a 22-year conflict that claimed at least 2 million lives. In April of 2010, Sudan held its first national elections in over 20 years. Omar Hassan al-Bashir won the presidency of Sudan with 68% of the vote. Salva Kiir would win the presidency of the government of the Southern Sudan with 75% of the vote. On the 9th of January 2011, the Southern Sudanese voted in a referendum stipulated in the 2005 Comprehensive Peace Agreement to decide if the region would separate from the north and become an independent nation. So after decades of war, the people of Southern Sudan voted 99% in favor of independence. And on July 9, 2011, mass celebrations swept across South Sudan as it became the world's newest country.
And whatever the problems, this is their moment. It's a time for celebration. Poverty won't disappear overnight, but what Southern Sudanese saw as a northern occupying force has gone.
Unfortunately, this is not the end of this sad story. Another civil war would break out in South Sudan between 2013 and only ending in February of 2020. This was after South Sudan's President Salva Kiir accused his former deputy, Riek Machar, and 10 others of attempting a coup d'etat. Fighting then broke out between the Sudan's People's Liberation Movement, the SPLM, and their opposition, the SPLM-IO, igniting the civil war. About 400,000 people were estimated to have been killed in the war by April of 2018. The outbreak of civil war in South Sudan damaged its economy as well as that of Sudan, depriving Sudan of much-needed pipeline revenues. This war in South Sudan also precipitated an increase in Sudan's already large population of refugees and internally displaced persons. This region of Sudan is now on a journey to recovery, but the situation remains precarious. Hopefully, these nations will fully heal. If you are new here and are interested in getting more similar content, then don't be shy to subscribe and to click the notifications bell so that you don't miss out on any new uploads. Don't forget to like and share the video if you found it useful. Next time, we'll be looking at Nigeria's civil war, also known as the Biafra War. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.